C60 olive oil is a popular choice for people wanting to activate their full potential. Improved sleep, faster recovery and more energy are just a few of the amazing comments received from our customers who take a spoonful a day. Make C60 oil a part of your daily routine and see what it can do for you. Activate your potential today at thec60company.com.
Hello and welcome to this David Icke Connector video cast. Well, more and more parents around the world are getting more and more concerned about the erosion of their rights to make decisions about their children. And there is a war on children coming from every which way angle. And there's a reason for that. If you want to control the adult world completely, just a few short years from now, then you have to control the minds of those adults who are currently children and young people. The agenda that's unfolding, that I've been exposing for decades, is so extreme, so extraordinary, that this provides its greatest form of defense, because people look at what people like me are saying and they go, they'd never do that. They're doing it drip by drip, day by day. And this is nowhere more obvious and more blatant with regard to children. Those two books that are proved to be so stunningly prophetic, 1984 by George Orwell and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, are perceived to be novels. And okay, on one level they were. But they weren't coming purely from imagination. They proved to be far too accurate for that. And Aldous Huxley, who was an insider, published Brave New World in the 1930s. And in there, he described a society in which parents did not exist, not even for procreation. That children were produced according to castes, their place in the hierarchy, in world state hatcheries, technologically, and then the state had complete control of their upbringing, which meant had complete control of their perceptions and their behavior all their lives. What he described is what is happening before our eyes if people would only connect the dots. I have this phrase I use: know the outcome and you'll see the journey. So what I'm going to do today in relation to children is to describe the desired outcome that we are being driven towards, and in doing so, expose the journey, step by step by step, towards that outcome. So Number one, in relation to children, the state wants complete control of them from birth. This is why more and more parental rights are being eroded month on month, year on year, why the state-controlled schools are having more and more power to decide what happens to children. Why, and I'll come to this in more detail later, why we have a social services mafia, not just in Britain, but in America, in Canada, and all around the world, that are increasingly stealing children, literally, from loving parents for the most spurious reasons and forcing them into adoption and foster parents of the state's choosing. This is why in Britain parents are being fined for taking their children on holiday in term time when it is far cheaper than out of term time when the travel companies exploit that by whacking up their prices. We have reached a point in Britain alone where parents can't even decide to go on holiday with their children when they choose. And make no mistake, being fined now will become completely banned eventually if we don't get our asses in gear. Look at all the ways that parental choice and parental influence and decision making is being deleted. It's step by step, stepping stones, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, to the outcome of complete state control of children. Another big goal, central goal of this agenda is to create a global communist, fascist, different masks on the same face, tyranny in which a few at the center will dictate and decide the lives of everyone else. To bring that about, you have to find ways of justifying centralization of global power to impact on the fine detail of people's lives everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the climate change hoax. That is what it's all about. And of course, we're now seeing the young as the foot soldiers, the stormtroopers and Twitter stormtroopers of pushing climate change transformations of human society to do what? To create centralization of power and control over every area of people's lives to, quote, save the world. A world they have been convinced needs saving because of the drip, drip, drip propaganda about that they've been subjected to day after day after day throughout their formative years in the state-controlled, 1% controlled schools, colleges and universities. And so now you have the young so programmed, not all of them, but vast numbers, so programmed that they are actually campaigning for their own freedom to be deleted for the rest of their lives. to fight something that's not actually happening. And because ultimately the force that controls governments, thus controls the school, college, university, and so ridiculously named education system, also controls the media, you get this. For instance, in the British national newspaper, the Daily Mirror, this week, using a newborn baby on its front page to push the propaganda, the lies about human-caused climate change, to underpin what the kids are reading and being told in the schools. This bullshit in this newspaper even has a 2-page spread about how climate change is endangering polar bears, when that myth, that lie, has been long discredited by polar bear experts, because there are more polar bears now than there were 40 years ago. We had a series of articles in the British Daily Mail recently demonising parents who don't want to vaccinate their children because they've had the brain power to actually check out the facts. So what's happening in the schools, the colleges and the universities worldwide is that children and young people are being indoctrinated to believe in lies, and through believing those lies, demand a global centralized tyranny that they will have to live under all their lives. And by the time they realize that, it'll be too late. Of course, another facet of this agenda is and must be, to achieve its outcome, is the deletion of freedom of speech. And through these decades of fierce indoctrination in the school system and the education system in general, we've now reached a point where in recent polls, more than 50% of young people in America want curbs on freedom of speech, not least under the heading of hate speech. And of course, what is designated hate speech constantly gets expanded in its definition, so you can delete more and more of what people can say. It comes under the heading of political correctness, which is simply manipulating the population to silence itself. So, here we have, in these two agendas alone, a whole generations of children and young people, so indoctrinated, with many honourable exceptions, by the way, but I'm talking about the majority here, in the education system. We have these young people and children. That's why they brought in Greta Thunberg. Child relates to children. We have them demanding, because of their indoctrination about climate change, a centralized tyranny for the rest of their lives, and also that their own free speech be deleted. Because, no, we're not saying delete my free speech, we're saying delete the free speech of people we've been programmed not to agree with. No, that's where it is now. The plan is that all free speech that is outside the tiny and ever tinier band of what is acceptable will be deleted by the very people you are demanding now delete the free speech of other people. Another part of this agenda, which I've gone into in detail in the books, is to transform the nature of human gender, human sex, to create a no-gender human. And because, you see, all these dots connect in the end, because the plan ultimately is to have children produced in what Huxley called world state hatcheries, there is no need for gender because there's no need for human procreation. And so, this whole transgender explosion, big red flag. When something comes out of nowhere and is suddenly everywhere, it's the agenda. The plan is to confuse gender and then fuse gender into the no-gender human. And that's what this is all about. It's not about protecting transgender people from discrimination. I'm all for protecting everyone from discrimination. But that's not what it's about. That's just the excuse. It's a foot in the door. And so, we now have children, small kids, being systematically confused and bewildered about their gender when they weren't before. Oh, more and more people are questioning their gender. Why do you think that is? Try indoctrination. And so we're having small kids being given drugs to transform their sexuality, their gender, by doctors who ought to be in bloody jail for child abuse. And at the same time, we're having the curriculum bringing in, as part of its indoctrination, to get children to, and young people in general, to question their gender. To the point where, if you say, actually, I believe there are only two sexes, you can lose your bloody job. And this is why we're seeing drag queens being introduced to schools and children, not just in one country, because this is a global agenda, in country after country. Suddenly, out of nowhere, it's everywhere. Drag queens reading to children to further confuse their sense of gender and to eliminate any idea that there are two sexes, either male or female. Now, people can debate that if you like, and they should. But that's not what is allowed, is it? Debate. Because if you want people to believe something, and what you want them to believe does not stand up to debate, you simply stop the debate by shutting the other side down. Now, connected to that is another agenda, which again is unfolding before our eyes day after day. And that is the plan, and they even give a time period of 2030, to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence, so artificial intelligence becomes the human mind and dictates all thought and emotional response. Not that there'll be much with AI. So, if you are targeting a time period for this to get really underway, then you want control of the minds of the then adults in places of influence, and indeed adults in general, who will be quite open to that. So this is what you do. You start with the children that you know will be the adults at the time you want to bring it all in. So you get them addicted to technology that they hold. Oh, it's smart technology. Oh, it's smart. It does everything to stop me being smart, but it's smart. And you get them addicted. Well, what's the phrase? Job done, isn't it? And then, because you want to get in the body and you want to get in the brain, you then go to the next stage, which is from holding to on the body. And so you have all these technologies that you wear, and glasses and Bluetooth and Apple Watches, because you're on the body now. Cool, nearly there, nearly there. And then you go to the next stage, which is in the body. Gotcha! And that's why children have been addicted to this technology. And to build this global grid, which will connect, they want, to every human brain, they need communication power of at least 5G, and that's why that's being played out without any testing, because if they tested it, it would never be allowed. And not just testing, by the way, for effect on the body, but effect on the mind, psychological manipulation, which is possible. It's already happening. And then there's another one. You may have noticed this. Reverse racism, which, ironically, but in the technique of inversion that these people constantly invoke, you might expect it. That is, you call something racist as if you're against racism, but in doing so, you are racist against others. Now, where I'm coming from is I want equality of opportunity for everyone who wishes to take that opportunity. I want to see no one discriminated against by their color, by their culture, by their sexuality. I have a simple philosophy. Do what you like, just don't impose it on anyone else. But that's not what's happening. Instead of no racism, we have reverse racism, and it's being indoctrinated in the schools. I'm going to give you a massive example of that shortly, where you blame white people for everything. And the idea is to get white people to hate themselves, to loathe themselves, and to acquiesce to whatever they're told to do. That is racism. And I'm against all racism, including that. Like I say, I'll give you a great example of that in a minute. So, if you are going to achieve these goals, then you have to control the minds, the perceptions of the young, who will become the adults when you want the goals to reach their fruition. And so you control the schools, the universities, and the colleges, and what is taught there. And day after day, week after week, you have access to the minds of the entire, virtually, young generation to indoctrinate them in the agenda you want for the world. And that is what has been going on. And that is why we're seeing this woke generation who are not awake, but woke, which is the opposite of awake, who are demanding everything that this agenda, ultimately controlled by the 1%, wants to inflict upon the world. We had this lady, Kamala Harris. She's running for president for the Democrats. Of course, she won't win because she's bloody useless, but she articulates the agenda every time she opens her mouth. And this week, she was calling for the school day to be extended to 6 p.m. to align with the working day in America. And what does this do? It gives more indoctrination time to schools and less parental influence time to parents, which is exactly what the agenda is all about. And we have this whole woke mentality, which is driven by the 1%. That's why all these billionaires and billionaire corporations are pushing it. What if these social justice warriors ever ask why billionaires that absolutely have contempt for social justice are funding and promoting what they want? This woke mentality is now calling for community schools. What is that Orwellian speak for? Control of children by the state via the schools. And another part of this is to manipulate, thanks to the 1%, the financial system, which has forced both parents in the vast numbers of cases to have to go out to work just to pay the bills, or some go out to work because they want a bigger house or whatever. But whatever, there would be this process that both parents want must work. That's what the system wants. Not least because it's got two people to tax then. And what is this all about? This financial manipulation, particularly among the people in the lower levels of the financial society. It's forcing them to be at work and not with their kids, so their kids can be controlled and indoctrinated by a system dictated by someone else for very sinister ends. So what we have then is a system that has been set up and is getting more and more extreme to control what people, young people and children hear from preschool right the way through to the end of university if they go there, and get themselves into pretty much lifelong debt for doing so, so they pay for their own programming. And when they look at newspapers, they'll read shite like that, and the programming is underpinned. And I said I'd give you an example of indoctrination and how it's systematic. And this is a story that came to light this week. New curriculum called Deep Equity, deeply racist, demonizes white people. A new curriculum in schools across the nation, talking about America here, teaches that America is a deeply racist nation because they want to divide everybody on racial, cultural, and sexual lines so they can have the target population at war with itself and they can string pull and push the world in their desired direction while everyone else is fighting with each other. See? Real simple. That America is a deeply racist nation with a hierarchy of various oppressions. Called deep equity, it demonizes whites while deep-sixing debate, instructing teachers to reject and resist parents who disagree. This is official policy here. It's happening everywhere. This is just an American example. The idea is that dissenting white people are simply too ignorant and immersed in privilege. What, including those sleeping in the streets in Los Angeles and New York? Them? They are simply too ignorant and immersed in privilege to recognize and acknowledge their oppressor status. Excuse me. Created for profit education company Corwin, owned by Sage Publishing, Deep Equity is the latest example of how the wokeness has abandoned education in favor of naked political propaganda. Corwin describes its curriculum as a teacher training program that is aimed at producing real school improvement for equity and social justice, mainly by attacking the students on the basis of their color. This is, of course, the reverse racism I'm talking about. According to Deep Equity, America is based on a hierarchy of various oppressions. Men oppress women, Christianity oppresses Islam, English oppresses Spanish, and white people oppress everyone. Divide and rule. If you have a problem with Deep Equity, you are yourself entrenching oppression. You are part of the problem. According to Corwin, differences in academic performance have nothing to do with culture or effort. They are purely the product of racism. How does Deep Equity fight this racism? By instructing teachers on different types of white identity orientations. Most white people have a fundamentalist white ideology, it says, defined by denial, ignorance, and supremacy. See the white people sleeping in the streets of Los Angeles and New York and London and all other places you can name. Deep Equity teaches teachers never fear, though, they can possibly work their way towards wokeness as the instructional sheet below informs. Moreover, if whites are willing to humbly and obediently sit at the feet of their enlightened betters and learn their whole life, they can advance what the curriculum calls the White Allies Action Agenda, with instructions for becoming a tolerable white person. And what is this except the re-education doctrine of Stalinism and Chairman Mao and the Marxist fascist ideology in general? And it's worth remembering, according to this article, that school educators are generally drawn from the same teachers' colleges who have been indoctrinated in the same way. It's all centrally dictated. And you find that the textbooks that children read are also produced by a very small number of publishers. So there is a systematic war on our children, and white children are being pressured to hate themselves and loathe themselves. Child abuse, anyone? When in fact, it's just the body, and we are all the consciousness having a brief experience through the body. So, parents, in very large numbers, don't like this, where they know it's actually happening. But so many are intimidated into staying silent and allowing it to happen by fear of consequences, and not least by this mafia which social services has become. Now, let me say first, there are a large number of outstanding, caring, decent social workers. I am not talking about those. I'm talking about those that run the system, and significant numbers of social workers who glory in parting children from their parents. This has become an epidemic, and it is increasingly intimidating parents into silence and acquiescence for fear that the social worker will come knocking on their door. You won't be surprised to know that in Britain, this really exploded under Tony Blair. If you're looking for the origin of so much that we might call evil in Britain, its political, not its original, but its political origin will invariably be Tony Blair. And the numbers of children, not just in Britain, America, all over, that are being taken, stolen from loving parents on the most spurious, outrageous reasons and lies, is going through the fricking roof year on year. And this is fundamentally part of this whole process of the state taking over control of children. I've been involved and I've spoken to so many mothers, fathers who have had their children who they adored taken from them and forcibly adopted through family courts that are absolutely secret, so what goes on in them, it cannot be reported. Why? To stop the truth coming out of what's going on. What I've heard, what I've seen has broken my heart so many times. Imagine what it must be like for those that are directly affected by it. Of course, if children are being abused by parents, they should be removed. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about children being taken from caring, loving parents for no other reason than it's the system's agenda. Blair introduced financial incentives to do it. So, if you care about your kids and you love your kids, your worst nightmare is losing them. So you look around and you see people losing their kids to the frickin' state. Fascism and you think, I'm going to keep my head down here because I don't want to lose mine. So, although I don't agree with what's happening to my kids at school, etc., I better keep my mouth shut. And then you see increasingly mandatory vaccinations for kids. And let's kid ourselves again that that's just about what happens to their health through vaccines. We should also be aware of what happens to their mind. How many vaccine-damaged children are damaged in the brain? And that's the extreme. What is happening to the way the brain processes information after vaccination that doesn't get that extreme enough, but still affects the perceptions of the child and the information processing of the child for the rest of its life. Then we have the drugging of children with an increasing array of reasons. Oh, he's asking questions. Drug him. He's not concentrating. No, because he's being bored stiff by what you're trying to indoctrinate into him. Drug him. Give him Ritalin. There you go. Sorted. Then there's, and that's going through the roof as well, by the way. Then there's social media. Dehumanizing social media, which is scrambling the emotions and the thoughts and perceptions of the young. And then there's violent video games, dehumanizing, desensitizing, all planned, all coming ultimately from the same source in this war on children worldwide. Is it really just a coincidence that something else is going through the roof? Suicide by the young? I know how frightening it must be for parents to consider challenging this state imposition for all the reasons I've talked about. But unless we do, and in numbers, where it is now is not where it's meant to end. We make a stand now and start rolling this back, or the nightmare is just going to get more extreme as they get closer and closer to all those outcomes that I've described. It's time for parents not just to summon their courage for their kids' sake, but to get organized and start creating unions of parents that can collectively challenge this fascism that is planned to end with the end of parents. We stand up now, or we regret it forever.